Good morning, Jorge.
Good morning, Michael.
We have chosen today to discuss education, and I've arrived with the certainty that the position that you will articulate will be one that forwards the position that just about everything should be given to just about everybody, and that will reflect the typical position that you take vis-a-vis the nanny state and the nanny world. And amazingly enough, in this regard, in regard to education, I do not fiercely disagree with you. I share with you what I'm sure is your belief that every kid born should get the opportunity to discover his or her innate talents.
Mm-hmm.
Therefore, I do support the nanny state vis-a-vis providing the best elementary and high school education that we can provide to absolutely everybody. At the same time, I do not begrudge the wealthier people in our society the right to send their kids to private schools. At the same time, I want our public schools to give the greatest opportunity to absolutely everybody. Beyond high school, we can get to that in a moment, but first I await your agreement with my general proposition.
I think I want to say thank you. I think, but that was a bit of a guess. We agree. Yes, we agree that up until that point, I do believe the public school should be given for free. I wouldn't call it because of a nanny state. I'd probably go more as a society. We need to, education is one of the bigger things that propels us forward. Because if you educate someone, they might, advance something, let's say, technologically, medically. And so education is such a pillar of what moves us forward. So making sure that everyone in society has it and is given it for free and fairly and a good education, because that's the problem that happens when you say if you're wealthy you can have your private. You'll have societies that the public will be so much less good. So how do you balance that? How do you make that standard for the public school? Where do you put the mark? What's good enough? What's, goes back to the medical conversation of last week. Like, what is the benchmark that you say when it comes to offering it? We'll just talk right now till high school. How do you feel? So you feel private schools should be something that if you have the money, you should be allowed to do it. How do you feel about religion in this case? Like that kind of part that they don't look at. I'll make my point more clear. How do you feel about religious schools that don't want to teach exactly what the public school is teaching? So where's the line as a society that we say this is what we need our people to know?
Religion should have no place in public schools.
Mm-hmm.
I do not begrudge any religious denomination from running their own school system. However, furthering yet more the reach of the nanny state, and I will explain in a moment why I insist on calling it the nanny state. Furthering that reach, I would insist that every private religious school live up to a basic curriculum of secular subjects by law, because I would consider it child abuse to deprive a child of basic mathematical and literacy skills, and basic knowledge of human history, planetary geography, etc., especially if it is done in the interest of filling the child's head with supernatural nonsense.
That's where it gets tricky. Because I mean, I think the basic idea at the moment even is like the government will have a definition of like they have to teach this and you can add other extracurriculars to it. But as you just said, the problem comes with science, with history, with a lot of that things that just go 100% against the religious study. I don't want to take it in there about it being education, but this is where the complications of what is to allow private schools to work, and it's not just the wealthy, it's also the smaller groups that go against what the majority has decided is the best for society. So the nanny state.
Why do I insist on calling it the nanny state? It's
Yes.
because I want to constantly remind ourselves and our listeners that I am generally against furthering the reach of the state into our lives. While I do believe that certain entitlements should be given to every citizen, but based on the collective will and basic agreement, excuse me, I want to constantly remind ourselves that that is not the best way to go, and that the best way to go is to leave the widest possible area of freedom around the individual. The widest possible area where there is no coercive action by the state. Mm-hmm. Here, I'm actually supporting the state coercing a family to send their children to public school. It should be absolutely against the law for a family to restrain their children from going to school, or for a family not to properly homeschool those children according to state guidelines. That is a considerable concession on my part from opposition to the nanny state.
Yes.
But I'm keenly in opposition to any possible child abuse, and I would consider withholding the fundamentals of education from a child to be exactly that, child abuse. But get back for a moment to my insistence as well on leaving open the possibility for people to exercise their right to send their children to private schools. Are you suggesting, I don't think you have suggested, but would you suggest that private schools be outlawed?
If I was the king, as one would say, I say yes. And this is hypocritical, of course, as someone who went to one, but I think there's different kinds of schools and that could be within the public system. Like just because I say public system, I don't also mean it should be across the board. Just everyone's the exact same. I don't believe education should work that way. Like that whole here's a box and everyone fit in it or you're done, which is the public school idea. But at the other end, there is some issues with private schools. There is some, I mean, it goes back to it being unfair in society. For me, it's more towards the religious point of views that couldn't have a proper education for people. It might be more on my secular side here rather than like rich versus poor. I think it'd be interesting idea if within the public school you had a more competitive set of schools that maybe there's some competition. I do believe maybe not in elementary school, but high school you could have more competition, like the more artistic side of schools, more scientific side of schools, the more schools that set you up better for trade schools. I know it's tough in high school to make someone choose what they want to do, but if they happen to like something, have the ability to go at it, which I think a lot of time private schools do a really good job at it. Like if you're into some extracurricular, a lot of the times high schools that are private high schools have the money to invest in theaters and or
There's no no doubt that the kids of wealthier parents have it better, are exposed to more, and are thus more likely to achieve more in life because they are given greater opportunity and wider scope. There's no doubt about that. But to curtail that would be to curtail human freedom. Do you think your millennial generation agrees with you generally on your position?
Um, I think my generation and education are in a weird state. I think we can segue now into university because my generations would say almost specifically we were at the forefront of it. The whole go get a university degree and then there will be a job for you outside of it or go study whatever. I think universities sold a weird idea that like they started making all sorts of degrees and getting that higher education set up a lot of people to then not have the jobs that mean it, that whole education, and especially in the US, the amount of money that people invested in the education for nothing. For a lot of people would say, there.
Do I do I detect in your remarks an unwillingness for you to advocate public subsidy for all to attend university?
Funnily enough, probably the opposite of that. I want a lot more public subsidy, and I want universities to not be treated as businesses the way they are, like here, at least in Montreal. I feel a lot of the universities are treated in a way that they need to just keep growing and keeping, instead of having the best education possible and trying to make students that will achieve a lot. I don't know if it's a hard thing to achieve, and that's why universities just try and grow, like make more buildings, get more money, and that part is what drives them, instead of saying we have the list of the top 10 whatever in the world.
I think we have finally reached a point of fierce disagreement because I do not believe that beyond high school there should be any public subsidy for education. Because by the end of high school, it should be obvious to every individual whether or not that individual has the intellectual wherewithal to go further academically, to go further professionally. And there should be a point at which an individual decides, no, I cannot be a lawyer or a doctor, but the society needs carpenters and welders and plumbers, and society gives very little notice to the need for those people. We rather import them in our immigration, whereas we ought to be paying a heck of a lot more attention to the trades. So I would not allow the government to spend a dime except in the form of loans to worthy students who have proved themselves academically, who have shown through exams and otherwise that they can get into universities, and the universities should severely tighten their entrance requirements. And that basically is my position on university subsidization.
Could you not see trade schools in the same realm? So we treat them the same, as in there isn't such a difference. If someone wants to study communication or how to be a carpenter, it's seen in an equally, like when you're in CEGEP or in high school, like you're offered the choice, and if it fits better for you. The other part you have to say also at 17, 18, is someone ready to choose? Like, are they able to make that decision? That's a whole other issue. Like, are they able to decide that they're never not going to be able to be lawyers?
In the
Or
in the course of my lifetime, I have seen extraordinary maturation of individuals at a younger and younger age, and maybe it's evolution. I don't know what it is, but I see kids of 16, 17, 18 far more able to foresee what they want in life now than I did back in the 1960s when I was at that age and my peers were at that age. So yeah, a
I mean,
17-year-old should be able to realize from his or her academic performance thus far what they can do in life
and
and what they can't do.
why alone? Why not? I mean, if you were to make the universities stricter by the government themselves and offer education that was highs of standards, but they only accepted 100, you wouldn't want the government to offer that. That individual, you think the education is so worth it that if it's a loan, when they graduate, they'll get a job. The problem comes when they graduate and there isn't a job for them. Might be bringing out a different issue here, which is
I can tell you that I was paying off my student loans into my late 30s. I was doing it at like the rate of $100 or $150 a month, but I was, and it was a millstone around my neck. It was a burden. It was an albatross in my life, but I did it. I paid for my university education. Looking back, was it such a tremendous burden? No, no, and I can't say that I'm sorry. I can't say that I feel bad about it, and I can't feel bad about asking the current generation to do the same.
right.
And I agree with you. Yes, if somebody wants to go to carpentry school or welding school and can't afford it, then loans should be available to them. But there should be strict enforcement of payback. Because, again, in opposition to the nanny state, I want to encourage self-reliance, individualism, non-governmental interference.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I can say I disagree so much, like, crazily with you, but there are some issues even with that system. I think with university, the biggest one I see, which just makes this whole argument hard, is who decides what's a good program to study and why. Because if you go in the, you might kill me for the libertarian way of looking at it, you go, well, here's a loan, study whatever the hell you want. When you're done your program, start paying it up, right? Like that's it. So if we were to have a public side of things, we would have to stop saying study whatever you want, study these things that are gonna be conducive to creation, to innovation, to other things, and then someone has to decide what those programs are, and then we're getting really nanny state if someone has to decide what's important and what's not important to learn, because there's today and age there's a lot of programs that many people wouldn't consider. We would get in a weird fight about what is considered good for society or not. All the MFAs, the Masters of Fine Arts, would have a hard time arguing to many politicians that would be the ones deciding if that's the thing. I'm assuming communications would have a hard time because they might be creating all the opposition, all the journalists against them. So you're like, well, we're going to fund the people that are against us, you know?
In reference to what is good to provide in general education, I was going to segue us into another dimension of the discussion, but I'm looking at the clock and I suspect that we're going to have enough to say on that topic for an entirely separate and independent discussion. So I think that we should bid ourselves a good day at this point and save that topic for the next discussion.
That sounds good. I want to ask you a recap question. Can you give me a quick recap of your opinion quickly? High school and elementary school should be public for everybody. Private schools should be offered without any...
Be allowed to exist.
Allowed to exist. They just have to follow the benchmark of the public schools.
Yes.
And universities, you want zero...
I want universities to be private. I want them to have extraordinarily high entrance standards. And I want them to be more elitist than they are today, because I see a lot of useless degrees being granted. I see a lot of people going into university who are not truly qualified to be there. And I see the trades not being staffed to the extent they could be, because students are being funneled into the university system with the mistaken belief that they will have better jobs once they come out the other end.
Yeah, I think university is something that, I think you're showcasing the issue that is plaguing us right now. I'm not sure if the solution is making more private and more elite in that sense. There's countries like the Netherlands that will have public systems that are similar to what you're saying about it being harder to get into and having a nice ranking of how good the universities are. But I think the discussion shows that it's a complicated subject, as always. But it's fun.
Thank you for the discussion. See you next week.